Welcome to Sport Safety International's HeatWise, educating coaches and others involved in sports and physical activity on the prevention and management of exertional heat illness. Following the completion of this course, coaching participants should be able to understand the basics of hydration, recognize the impact of dehydration on health and performance, understand prevention and management strategies of dehydration, understand and recognize heat illnesses, understand strategies to prevent heat illness, understand immediate treatment and management of heat illnesses, understand criteria for recovery and return to play following heat illness. As a coach, you are likely no stranger to hearing about the importance of properly hydrating your athletes and taking extra precautions when playing in hot and humid environments. This could be indoors or outdoors. Being dehydrated and overheated can certainly lead to diminished performance capabilities of all athletes, regardless of what sport one plays or how old a person is. Many years ago, not drinking water during practices and competitions was perceived as a sign of toughness. It turns out that such logic was irrational, and fortunately today, we all realize the importance of being properly hydrated. Regardless of our knowledge and efforts to keep our athletes hydrated, we still face challenges of implementing common sense guidelines. For example, heat-related deaths among high school and college football players in the United States nearly tripled between 1994 and 2009. But an athlete does not need to play football to be affected by dehydration and hot temperatures. Anyone can be stricken with a heat illness episode or become dehydrated. As you will learn in this educational program, predisposing risk factors may play a major role in helping to identify who will be more prone to heat illnesses. The good news is that knowing this information and becoming educated helps one to prevent unnecessary adverse conditions. Prevention is the key. And as a coach, you are now taking a big step in doing your part to keep your athletes safe and performing at optimal levels. When an athlete's body temperature rises, evaporation of sweat from the skin surface is the primary way of cooling down the body. When a lot of sweating occurs and more fluid is lost from sweating compared to how much is taken in through drinking, an individual is likely to become dehydrated. In some sports, like swimming, it is difficult to recognize how much an athlete is sweating, but one can still become dehydrated and overheated while in a pool. When someone sweats, water components that make up the body systems are lost. This is referred to as body mass loss, or BML. Studies have consistently shown that individuals who lose 2 to 3% of their BML will likely have a decrease in exercise performance. Body mass loss greater than 3% may not only impact one's sports performance, but in a more serious way, it could alter how body organs function, such as how the brain thinks, how the heart beats, and how other vital organs respond to being dehydrated. How much do athletes actually sweat? There isn't really one simple answer, as many criteria will determine how much each individual person sweats during activity. Some of the criteria include one's own past medical history, whether or not one is acclimated to hot and humid environments, one's overall health and physical conditioning status, and how long and intense an activity is. Other factors will be discussed throughout this course. There is no magical or mysterious method for hydrating athletes. In fact, the process should be fairly simple. So here are some simple tips to consider. First, always have drinks accessible. Drinks should be easily accessible. Forgetting drinks or placing them too far away from where athletes are participating will not be helpful scenarios. Second, have many cups available. When providing drinks from a cooler for a team to share from, cups should not be shared. And if you run out of cups, it will possibly serve as an excuse not to drink. Individual water bottles are also very helpful and may be better than coolers or cups, depending upon the sporting environment. These bottles should not be shared amongst players either, as the spreading of germs can lead to other medical conditions and illnesses. Much debate exists about what the best drink is for athletes. For the purpose of our simple tips, keep in mind that the best drink is one that tastes good, is of a temperature that the athletes find soothing. Drinks that have sour tastes or are too warm, for example, may deter an athlete from becoming properly hydrated. So how much fluid should an athlete drink? Here are some simple guidelines that are recommended by many sports organizations. Begin the activity hydrated. Drink 17 to 20 fluid ounces 2 to 3 hours before the activity. Drink 7 to 10 fluid ounces 10 to 20 minutes before the activity. Drink 7 to 10 fluid ounces every 10 to 20 minutes during the activity. And to achieve efficient replenishment for your next activity, rehydrate within 2 hours after the activity ends. This is especially important for those athletes who are participating in multiple practices or games within a single day. It is important to reiterate the importance of rapid hydration that should occur within 2 hours of the end of a sport activity. What is the best drink to consume post-event? While water is the simplest and quickest for the body to digest and eventually rehydrating the body's systems, drinks that help replenish lost carbohydrates and electrolytes may also be necessary. What role does humidity in an environment play when it comes to dehydration and illness? Humidity can limit body temperature cooling. If an athlete loses the ability to cool down the body's core temperature, he or she will become overheated and likely experience a form of heat illness. The best way to know that this is taking place is to take one's temperature. While there are many methods for assessing core temperature, and while it may not seem practical for a coach to carry a thermometer around during a practice or game, recent scientific studies have shown that the only reliable method for assessing one's accurate core body temperature is by using what is called a flexible rectal probe. Performing this task should be left to trained medical professionals. So how exactly do you know if somebody is dehydrated? There are some common signs of dehydration that include the following: thirst, headache, irritability, dizziness, nausea, decreased performance, general discomfort, cramps, chills, and vomiting. Some sports, such as wrestling, have classifications that group athletes according to their weight. In many of these sports, athletes participate in activities that lead to weight loss, so that the perception is that they will be stronger at lower weight classes. With these types of practices happening, it is increasingly more important to monitor hydration status very closely. The following practices to drop weight are highly discouraged and considered to be unsafe. They are using diuretics, exercising in rubber suits, and exercising in a sauna. Though not scientific, the color of urine can be monitored to assess one's general hydration status. The lighter the urine, the more likely one is hydrated. By contrast, the darker the urine, the more likely one could be dehydrated. Urine color should not be used as the final deterrent as to whether or not one is hydrated, but can be used as a general guideline. As a coach who may be working with young athletes, it is important to take note that very young and adolescent age athletes will require additional attention to stay hydrated at proper levels. Therefore, you should highly consider modifying event schedules when possible to minimize high-risk times of the day, maximizing fluid replacement opportunities as previously described, and making additional efforts to educate your athletes and their parents. Let's spend the remainder of this course discussing what is referred to as exertional heat illnesses, or EHI. EHIs can range from a mild and easily resolved condition to a serious life-threatening condition. The 4 types that we will discuss are heat cramps, heat syncope, heat exhaustion, and exertional heat stroke. In your role as a coach, the purpose of this course is not to turn you into a medical professional. Rather, it is to bring to your attention the common symptoms associated with various heat illnesses, and more importantly, teach you how to properly manage these, and, in ideal situations, prevent them from occurring in the first place. Heat cramps are the mildest form of recognized heat illness. These typically involve small muscle contractions or twitches, most commonly seen in the calves. They usually occur during high-intensity exercise and are believed to be likely the result of electrolyte imbalances. Most heat cramps can be managed successfully. An individual should be removed from the environment of play to allow for muscle relaxation. Gentle local massage and stretching may help. However, it is important to understand that if a heat cramp is caused by electrolyte imbalance or dehydration, it will possibly reoccur until ample time has been allotted for rehydration and electrolyte balance to occur. Therefore, an individual with heat cramps should immediately drink more fluids, and fluids that contain electrolytes may be beneficial. If using a sports drink, small amounts of sodium can be added to the beverage. Heat syncope is another form of heat illness. Heat syncope often occurs during the first 5 days of acclimatization in the heat, when athletes are exposed to high environmental temperatures. Symptoms typically appear after an athlete is standing for a long period of time or after abruptly stopping an exercise or activity. This can be seen when a runner finishes a race or simply stops at the finish line. Dizziness and actually collapsing are not uncommon episodes for a person with heat syncope. Signs and symptoms of heat syncope may include dehydration, fatigue, tunnel vision, pale or sweaty skin, decreased heart rate, dizziness, lightheadedness, and fainting. Heat syncope should be taken very seriously. 911 should be activated immediately. The athlete should be removed from the activity and preferably transferred to a shaded area. The legs should be elevated, vital signs should be monitored, and if possible, the athlete should drink fluids in an effort to begin the rehydration process as soon as possible. Heat exhaustion can also be prevented by modifying practices when temperatures and humidity are high. Examples of ways to modify include, but are not limited to, decreasing the total practice time on a hot and humid day, avoiding exercising during the hottest times of the day by practicing out of the hot sun in the early morning or early evening, modify the intensity, modify the type and amount of equipment worn, and provide sufficient rest and fluid breaks. Signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion may include normal or slightly elevated body temperature, pale skin color, dehydration, dizziness and/or lightheadedness, vomiting, syncope, headache, profuse sweating, chills, cold clammy skin, and hyperventilation. Remember, heat exhaustion is a serious condition that can still lead to a more life-threatening condition. As a coach, when you see someone exhibiting the signs we discussed that look like heat exhaustion, you should activate the emergency medical system as soon as possible by calling 911. You should immediately remove excess clothing and equipment. Move the athlete to a cooler area where you can cool them down with ice towels, ice bags, or fans. Fluid replacement should also begin as soon as possible if the athlete is able to orally ingest fluids. Exertional heat stroke is the most serious of all the exertional heat illnesses, and amongst all of athlete deaths, it ranks as one of the top 3 causes. Fortunately, it is nearly 100% preventable. Exertional heat stroke is officially diagnosed when one has a core body temperature greater than 104 to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and the central nervous system that controls the brain and vital organs does not function correctly. This includes one's ability to regulate body temperature. Exertional heat stroke is the most dangerous of all heat illnesses that an athlete can encounter. As a coach, it is your responsibility to utilize all of your resources and immediately attend to an individual who exhibits signs of heat stroke. These signs and symptoms are elevated body temperature, hot and wet or dry skin, rapid heartbeat, low blood pressure, hyperventilation, vomiting and diarrhea, dehydration, dizziness, apathy, aggressiveness, seizures, and loss of consciousness. Remember, heat stroke is serious and death can result, but it is preventable. The primary goal is to decrease the athlete's body temperature as soon as possible after calling 911. Aggressive cooling via cold water immersion is the key to survival with heat stroke. Using a tub or kiddie pool with ice and water is extremely effective in rapidly cooling a victim of heat stroke. The victim should be immersed in a tub of cold ice water for about 10 to 15 minutes, or until the core to body temperature reaches 102 degrees Fahrenheit. After immersion, the victim's temperature will continue to drop. While immersing an athlete with heat stroke in a cold tub is the recommended procedure for cooling, a cold tub is not always readily available. In such cases, alternative methods of cooling will need to suffice. These might include rotating cold ice towels on the person and/or dousing the individual with cold water and ice from a cooler, hose, or locker room shower. Cooling methods such as placing ice packs on the superficial arteries, using general fans, or using tepid water will not be effective in reducing an athlete's core body temperature with heat stroke. Return to play following a heat illness should always be left to a trained medical professional. It is oftentimes difficult for a non-trained person to differentiate between a heat cramp and a more serious heat illness. As a coach, if you are ever in doubt of a player's level of heat illness, you should not allow one to return to play. Seek medical attention immediately in cases of emergencies. Activate EMS 911, remove from activity, preferably move to a shaded area, and cool down the body in cold immersion tubs. Allowing an athlete to return to participation in sport following a heat illness involves a step-by-step process. To begin with, an athlete must have a physician clearance. This is required because the physician will work closely to determine the cause of the heat illness. Information from the physician will assist in knowing if it is safe for the athlete to return to sport. This will oftentimes be a minimum of 7 days, and in many cases be longer to allow for further medical testing. The athlete must have no more symptoms and normal blood work. The step-by-step return process requires a progression toward a warm, humid environment, as well as a progression from low to high intensity exercise. If any signs and symptoms of heat strain are present, the progression must be slowed down, delayed, and again carefully monitored. If your athletic trainer or athlete's physician informs you that information obtained in a pre-participation examination raises a risk factor for heat illness, take it seriously. Remember, as a coach, you have a responsibility to keep your athletes safe and healthy. Methods of preventing heat illness include acclimatizing them to the heat, considering equipment modification during hot and humid conditions, promoting proper and adequate hydration, and educating all coaching staff members, student assistants, and others about the importance of proper hydration and cooling measures. It is important to mention a few special considerations. One of the most important indicators of whether or not an athlete will be predisposed to heat illness is if that athlete has had a past experience with heat issues. A history of having a heat illness is a strong predictor to take extra precautions with an athlete. Additionally, it is believed that dark-colored clothing and equipment attract the sun, thus potentially leading to higher core body temperatures. When you think of athletes who wear an eye black type product under their eyes, they do so to divert the sun from shining in their eyes to a place just slightly under their eyes. However, if one is wearing a dark uniform, the sun will be attracted to the entire dark color. Wearing excessive amounts of equipment and clothing will also minimize one's ability to cool down and sweat. Finally, athletes who tend to be overzealous have a tendency of increasing their heart rate and blood pressure beyond normal conditions. This, in turn, with a hot and humid environment, can lead to heat illnesses. A condition known as sickle cell trait is often associated with heat illness. While not specifically a heat-related illness, individuals with sickle cell trait may be more susceptible to heat-related illnesses than those who do not possess the trait. Sickle cell trait is a condition where certain individuals have abnormally shaped blood cells. These cells can log jam blood vessels, blocking normal blood flow to the tissues and muscles. This can occur during strenuous exercise, such as with conditioning drills and long-distance running, and can cause a breakdown of muscle, known as rhabdomyolysis. Symptoms include exercise-associated muscle pain and weakness, shortness of breath or fatigue. They may have altered mental status, and their core body temperature may or may not be elevated. This is a medical emergency. Athletes who exhibit these symptoms should be referred to a healthcare provider immediately. There are certain so-called stressors that can facilitate a sickle cell trait-related event. Since many of these also mimic those that trigger heat illnesses, it is important to take note of what they are. They include temperature and humidity, altitude, hydration status, asthma status, duration of exercise, the degree of exercise intensity, the type of sport or activity. As a coach, you should know that athletes have the opportunity to be screened to know if they are a carrier of the sickle cell trait. This is the best preventative measure. And yet, while it is mandatory at some levels of play, for example, NCAA Division I, unfortunately, at many other levels and in other organizations, it is not required. You should inquire with your organization as to whether or not your athletes have been screened for sickle cell trait. Learn of any existing results. And if such testing is not performed, become an advocate for change in your organization. Once again, remember that children will require special attention to remain hydrated and protect against heat illnesses. Additionally, older athletes, specifically ages 50 or higher, may need special attention as well to avoid dehydration and heat illnesses as a result of body systems not working as efficiently. Finally, please note that if you are working with athletes with disabilities, you will want to take extra precaution. Specifically, those with spinal cord injuries may not be able to regulate their body's cooling system, leaving them prone to overheating. The next 3 slides describe the 7 key points for a 14-day heat acclimatization period. The amount of time of heat exposure can have a dramatic impact on the athlete's ability to withstand exercise in the heat. It is recommended that for days 1 through 5, athletes may not participate in more than 1 practice per day, and total practice time should not exceed 3 hours in any one day. During these first 5 days, a 1-hour walkthrough practice is permitted. However, there must be at least a 3-hour rest break in between the walkthrough and a practice session. In sports requiring equipment, such as football or field hockey, there should be a progression of equipment. For instance, the only equipment allowed on days 1 and 2 is helmets. From days 3 to 5, only shoulder pads and helmets should be allowed, and full contact should not be permitted on days 1 through 5. On day 6, full equipment can be worn and full contact is allowed. For the remaining days of preseason, days 6 through 14, double sessions may take place, but there cannot be consecutive days of double sessions. In other words, a double practice day needs to be followed by either a single practice day or no practice. Similar to the first 5 days, a 1-hour walkthrough is permitted on the single practice days. However, there must be a 3-hour break in between these sessions. On double practice days, no practice should exceed 3 hours. There must be a minimum of 3 hours rest in a cool environment between practices, and total practice time should not exceed 5 hours a day. The National Athletic Trainers Association recommends having a certified athletic trainer on site before, during, and after all football practices. Here are some final additional tips to keeping your athletes properly hydrated and safe in environmentally hot conditions. Encourage your athletes to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep each night. Encourage them to eat a well-balanced diet. Develop event guidelines for at-risk conditions. Have a weather monitoring plan in place. Weigh high-risk athletes. Utilize shaded areas and minimize warm-ups. Have emergency equipment and plan accessible. As a coach, you can play a key role in one day saving a life. Be sure to work with your organizations to prepare and plan, keeping your athletes healthy and safe. In summary, dehydration can impair exercise performance, particularly when exercising in hot environments. Hydration planning should not only consider an individual's risk factors, but also the type of exercise, intensity, duration, and environmental conditions. Heat acclimatization is important in preventing exertional heat illnesses during those first days of exercising in the heat. Adequate nutrition and hydration together with exercising within physical fitness limits can help prevent heat illness. Exertional heat stroke can be fatal. However, proper recognition and rapid treatment via cold water immersion are imperative in preventing death from exertional heat stroke. Thank you for completing HeatWise. educating coaches and others involved in sports and physical activity on the prevention and management of exertional heat illness.